Now let's dig a little deeper into these options and classes and talk about these, because you will most likely see some sort of question that relates to these on the exam. We've already actually talked about these in a different video, and options allow us to provide additional configuration information to the client machine from our DHCP server. Now there's actually over 60 DHCP options, but there's something you need to know about here, okay? Make sure you catch this. When I added the server role to my server to create a DHCP server, and actually I did that back in the video entitled Adding DHCP Server Role Part 1. If I try to set up any additional options, it only gives me 4, 5, or 6 standard most commonly used DHCP options in a Windows environment. Once I have set this up and I go back in with the DHCP tool, there's over 60 options that I can set. So if you want additional ones, you'll have to do it in the Management Console administrative tool. Now, the standard ones in IP version 4 are 003 for router configuration, 006 for DNS servers, 015 for your DNS domain name, 044 for your WINS, NBNS, or NetBIOS name server addresses if you're using WINS, and then your WINS NBT node type. Now, if you remember, go way back into your WINS toolbox there. If you remember, we could set the WINS server up with P node and H node and B node, and I don't know what all those things were. I can't remember now. But this played with and set and determined, is a better word, I guess, how exactly the WINS server went about broadcasting when it broadcasted, and basically we're trying to stop as many broadcasts as possible. So anyway, you can set that information as well. This is very important for the exam, and I will show you this in just a minute when we go out to the tool. You can set these options. In other words, I can say, okay, I want to add DNS server information and WINS server. I can do it at the server level, which means any scope that I create on that server will automatically add that other configuration information in. And this is what I normally want to do. If you remember, when we were installing the server role, it pointed out that before we start clicking and dragging and setting up things, that we should go through and think through the process of the scopes we want, the addresses in those scopes, the options, and so forth. We should put as much stuff at the server level and let all the scopes inherit it as much as possible, obviously. Now, at the individual scope level, we can set these options, and those will be inherited, or those options will be applied to all leases and reservations in the scope. We haven't talked about reservations. We're going to talk about them in a separate video along with exclusions. Then the reservation level. Once we have made a reservation, then we can apply options to that specific reservation only. So you see, you've got a lot of ways and a lot of different levels here to set these. And what this means is I can have 2 or 3 scopes out there, each one with different options being handed out. So you can really tailor this. Now, there's one more level that you can go to, and that is through the use of classes. Now, what a class does is allows me to apply different options to different clients within a scope. Okay, so actually I can subdivide my scope. Let's say we've got 2 particular machines that need another piece of configuration that nobody else in the network needs. I can put these people in a unique class, and I'll have to create the class on the server, and I will have to set the class on the client machine. Now, you can go out in the documentation and look at that, but when I do that, then when this machine broadcasts, it tells the server, hey, by the way, I'm in this class, and the server will give it a different configuration. Now, there's 2 types of classes, vendor classes, and we can assign things to clients based on their vendor type, and a lot of people use this for different operating systems, Windows 2000, Windows XP, and so forth. Then the user ones, which is the one most people use. Now, the real bottom line is there is a default user class, and if you never mention classes, this is what everything's going into, and this is probably the way you'll leave it most of the time. There's a number of standard classes in there that I can choose, and then I can create my own classes as well. So now let's jump out to the console and actually play with some of this, and let me show you this visually, okay? Okay, so here we are at the desktop. I'll click on Start. Go to Administrative Tools and then slide up to the DHCP Management tool and open that. I'll double click the title bar to make it full screen. Spread this little guy out so that we can see everything here. And notice in my IP version 4, first of all, if you will notice that I have a scope options and a server options. Well, anything that I set on options at the server level will be applied to all my scopes, okay? This scope and any other ones. So what I'll have to do, and let me show you a little oddity here. If I right click on server options, sometimes you won't see this. It'll be grayed out. So always left click first, then right click, and I can configure my options. Now remember I said there were over 60 options. Here they are. Now this is a very irritating window dialog box here. You can't expand it. You need to write Bill a nasty letter about this. But if I scroll down, you can see all the things that we can set as part of DHCP. Now, you owe it to yourself to go look through this and see what you can actually do. And let me show you something. If we go to the Advanced tab, you'll notice that we can set our classes back here. Now notice we have the vendor classes that we talked about. And then we have our user classes. And then this is where you'll see those classes. Now notice we're actually in the default user class. So if I wanted to set a new class up, I can go to the server, left click, then right click and say define user class. Okay, and if I add a class here, I'll call it Mark, and I'll give it a description here. This is a test. And then I'll come down here and I have to put something about it out here as well. And if I click OK, it added it. And now if I go to my server options and right click and go to configure and advanced, I will now see that Mark class. So that's how you set it up. And then of course you'll have to go set it up on the user side, on the client side as well, to come in and match that. Now as you can tell, you can set scope options and configure those. Same thing with classes. So you can do it at the server, at the scope, and own reservations, but we don't have a reservation yet. As a matter of fact, next video we're going to talk about exclusions and reservations. So this has been about options and classes. So play with this, go through it a couple of times, get it burned into your brain, and you should be good to go on the exam.